Homeless LGBTQ Youth, Environmental and Cultural Factors by Shelby Shank and Tricia Grant. So the media portrays two different stereotypes of this population. First is the strung out runaway who's at fault for their own situation. The second is the homeless to Harvard type. It's the kid who was homeless and struggling in their youth who ends up finding wealth and prosperity in adulthood. Actually, though, there are many different reasons why homeless and LGBTQ youth are in the situations that they're in. Nearly 50% of them reported intense conflict or even physical harm from their family members, and that's why they left home. More than 25% of them were former foster kids who became homeless after aging out of the system. And LGBTQ youth are more at risk. They become the target of hate crimes, bias crimes, and are more vulnerable to domestic violence and sexual assault. They are also more vulnerable to drug use and sex work. Family support can literally make or break the health disparities of this population. It was repeated over and over and over again in our research that the homeless LGBTQ youth reportedly expressed that their family rejection or contention was the primary reason that they left home, that they ran away, that they are homeless. 50% of these youth experienced a negative reaction when they came out to their family, and more than 25% of them were actually forced to leave their homes. Rejection from their family is associated with increased statistics of depression, suicidal ideation, substance use, promiscuous activity, and obviously an increased risk for contracting HIV. Family rejection played a significant role in their compromised mental health as well. Inversely, family support and acceptance of their sexual orientation was shown as a protective factor against all of these health outcomes. Peer support is crucial to the LGBTQ homeless population. Homeless youth are characterized as receiving inadequate social support because of their environmental instability, because they literally have nowhere to call home and no one to really rely on. Because of limited education and little to no social support, 50% of the homeless youth were kids who actually aged out of the foster care system. Over 1.3 million homeless youth are enrolled in our U.S. school system, and there they're able to receive teacher and peer support, which makes a huge impact on their social stability and social support. Peer support has a positive impact on the lives of these homeless individuals. It's actually the biggest reason that they do or don't do drugs, use and abuse alcohol. It makes a big impact on their mental and physical health, and also obviously their social support. Is homelessness or sexual orientation cyclical in nature? So there's no actual proof of any genetic distribution for either of these populations. Although according to the National Alliance to End Homelessness, youth who have been homeless or received housing assistance in the past year were almost 2 times as likely to become homeless when they age out of the foster care system. So it's cyclical, but not genetic. Same as with LGBTQ+. You may be influenced, nature versus nurture. There's influence of acceptance if you are LGBTQ+ identifying, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's genetically distributed. How does the legal and political system support or affect this population? Within the United States, or the actual United States, proposes that at least some percentage of homeless people are indeed homeless because of their own fault or situations. While that is probably true, homelessness was a relatively invisible political issue affecting supposedly only a small portion of the population until the early 1980s. It became increasingly problematic throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries, at least within the United States. Since then, several states have enacted legislation to allow unaccompanied homeless youth, those who are under the age of 18, to obtain shelter or housing without their parents' consent. We've also since then had the Federal Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. This regulation allows youth to enter federally funded programs without parental notification or consent if the provider determines that contacting a parent or guardian is not in this youth's best interest. Potential barriers for the LGBT homeless youth population. It's no surprise that many cultures and religions have beliefs that oppose the lifestyle of the LGBTQ+ population. As far as specific to the homeless LGBTQ plus population, approximately 60% of the homeless services and shelters are run by religious groups who will deny service if the homeless youth's sexual orientation is known. If their sexual orientation becomes known within the shelter, A, they can be discriminated and abused within the shelter, or B, they can be kicked out. In the United States, there are only about 4,000 beds that are designated for homeless youth. 10% of those are dedicated to LGBT youth, even though the LGBTQ plus youth make up at least 40% of the homeless youth population, and yet only 10% of the beds are reserved for this group. There are many stigmas within the community regarding both LGBT population and the homeless population. The effect of these stigmas are cyclical in nature as far as they perpetuate isolation and rejection from society, and they perpetuate abuse and trauma. 40% of LGBT youth have been physically assaulted or attacked, and in a survey completed at Yale University, 65% of LGBT people reported being verbally insulted and 25% being physically threatened. So barriers to support are the abuse that they face. Barriers to healthcare, the abuse that they face. The fact that they face this abuse and yet there are further complications with the healthcare system means that they can't or won't seek the help that they need when they are physically abused. As far as the international scope of this population or regions of the world where they would be in danger or shunned, Utah, with their religious predominance, continually came up as one of those places. So in Utah, 65% of LGBTQ youth surveyed reported being verbally harassed at school, whereas only 51% of LGBTQ youth in the United States reported that. Also in Utah, 75% of teens felt like they would need to move away from the state of Utah in order to fit in with others of their sexual orientation or with peers in general, compared to 63% of the LGBT teens nationwide. Research has shown that homeless people as a group are seen as neither competent nor warm. They are considered the lowest of the low. This puts them at a greater risk for violence and discrimination no matter where they live. And no matter where homelessness is or youth homelessness, every homeless youth, regardless of their sexual orientation, face a high risk for disparities such as mental health complications, substance use and abuse, victimization, feeling the need to resort to criminal activity, utilizing unsafe sex practices either for recreation or in exchange for food, shelter, other basic necessities. And they all face barriers to education and employment. As far as internationally goes, the most unsafe or unaccepted areas tend to be those of Muslim culture and religion. They are ostracized very frequently from their families because of their sexual orientation. They're told that they can come back when they are cured. LGBT individuals are particularly at risk to socioeconomic disadvantages. They are statistically more vulnerable to poverty and therefore more at risk for homelessness. LGBT homeless youth are at an increased risk for poor mental and physical health. LGBT people in general are at risk for depression, anxiety, substance use and abuse, PTSD. But then you add on the homeless factor of that, and it just exacerbates all of these mental and physical health disparities, unfortunately. These health outcomes then perpetuate a vicious cycle of long-term homelessness. Now, what does race and ethnicity have to do with the health disparities of this population? Statistically, youth of color, especially those who are LGBT, have a disproportional statistic of homelessness. There are so many more of them that are homeless. 42% of the homeless population are Black and 20% are Hispanic. Both racial and sexual minorities are more likely to become homeless because of the higher likelihood of poverty, lower exposure to education, and other negative situational circumstances. services. Here's a chart that just shows the racial disparities of the LGBTQ youth homelessness and the juvenile justice system. So you can see the statistics of white youth versus that of black youth. Religion. Religion is huge, huge as far as the LGBTQ plus population goes. So religion is a driving force as to why these youth are homeless, specifically in Christianity religions and Muslim religions, as I mentioned previously. 77% of the homeless LGBT youth report familial rejection or abuse as the root cause of their homelessness. So they leave home because they're rejected by their families or because they're abused by their families. 45% of this group, of that 77% population, state that it is specifically because of a faith background. There are over 200,000 homeless LGBT youth, and the largest single reason that has been given as to why they are homeless is because of religious beliefs of their parents. Interestingly enough, it was noted that people who do not focus on religion daily tend to be more accepting of homosexuality. Health disparities. So how does gender affect this population and their health disparities? Sexual and gender minorities have been shown to have greater rates of mental health disorders, substance use disorders, and specific types of health problems compared to their heterosexual peers. Gender minorities are at a greater risk for physical and mental health problems, victimization, discrimination, verbal and physical abuse. And promiscuous activities within this population lead to different health problems such as sexually transmitted infections. Obviously, we're aware that HIV is a huge issue, not only within homeless groups, but specifically within gay male groups. They're at risk for so many more, just STDs in general, and that leads to further health problems. Geographical location actually does make a huge difference on the health disparity of this population. So each state has different health services available. So some states are going to be better than others. That's availability for homeless youth, but also LGBT youth, and then that of the same population. Extreme weather and temperatures definitely play a role with the health of homeless youth. You have different issues that come from sunny, warm areas as opposed to cold, wintry areas. Being homeless in and of itself creates health problems and makes healthcare more difficult to obtain because you're focused on meeting your basic needs, not necessarily seeking health care services when you need them. Washington State is ranked as the highest population for youth homelessness, but it also is one of the few states that has numerous policies in place to safeguard kids from living in the streets. So as far as in the United States, this is one of the safest states to live in. Homeless LGBT youth face biases at every single turn. There are biases within the school system, within the workplace, at the grocery store, in healthcare, from police officers, healthcare workers, and any other service provider. They face biases. They also face biases from their families. Approximately 20% of youth leave home because of their family members and the biases that they have and the fact that they disapprove of their gender or sexual orientation. So there are implicit biases. Many people think that all homeless youth had the choice to leave their homes and choose to be homeless, which is not true. The explicit biases are racial biases that play a major role in beliefs and actions taken towards homeless individuals. This includes stereotyping, socially distancing, all sorts of different things. To determine where it's safest worldwide for these kids to live, we're going to break it down in between homeless and LGBTQ+. So the most accepting countries of LGBTQ+ population are listed, and the least accepting countries. The United States actually ranks 23rd on the most accepting list. It's out of like 187, so that's pretty impressive. So noteworthy homeless programs are found in Finland, Los Angeles, California, Spain, Seattle, Washington, and Vancouver, Canada. So of the most accepting countries, Finland, Spain, and Canada are all found on that list. The United States is 23rd, so I mean it's on the list on the relatively high, but not up towards the top. So it would be safe to assume that these countries would all be the safest places for LGBTQ plus homeless youth to live. And then here is a list of our references.